My ghost stories. Haunting. I started seeing ghosts when I was a kid. First memory I have is going to an elderly neighbor's house with my mom when I was about 5. As we were walking to her house, I saw this elderly man standing in her garden. He smiled and appeared friendly. My mom walked on by him without saying a word. He never said anything either. I thought it was strange, but didn't say anything. We got inside the house and was chatting with the neighbor when I saw him in the hallway to the living room. He was watching us and smiling and not saying anything. I saw a photo of him in the living room with the neighbor lady, so I figured he must live there. Still, I noticed no one looked at him or said anything to him. Finally, the curiosity got the best of me and I said, "Who is that man in the hallway smiling and looking at us?" My mom and neighbor said no one was there and looked at me confused. I said, "The man in the picture is standing in the kitchen smiling at us and no one is saying anything to him." They told me that that was impossible because that was her husband, Bud, and Bud died 2 weeks ago, and that was why my mom came to visit her. Second time was when I was visiting my uncle's house. He and his wife had just gotten a waterbed, which was popular at that time. He was showing it to my mom and I. As we walked up the stairs to their bedroom, I saw this man who appeared to be in his late 20s/early 30s, sandy blonde hair, wearing only boxer shorts, pacing back and forth in the upstairs hallway. We walked right by him, and again, no one but me looked or said anything to him. I thought that was strange. He continued to walk back and forth on that strip of hallway, outside the door, and even looked in the room at us a few times. Again, I was curious about what was going on, so I asked my mom and uncle, "Who is the man walking around in the hallway?" They looked confused. My uncle said no one should be here. Let me go look. He comes back a few minutes later and said he saw no one. I said, "He is still outside the door." My uncle got quiet for a minute, sighed, and said, "Well, he's harmless then. Don't worry about it." My mom, even more concerned, asked my uncle what he meant by that and what was going on. My uncle then said that my cousin, who is the same age as me, had also reported seeing a man in their house. My uncle said he would tell my mom more about it, and we went downstairs. They made me play outside while they talked. I found out years later from my mom that my cousin, who also saw the man, was not believed by his parents at first that it was anything other than an imaginary friend. That was until my cousin started saying that the man lived in that house and wanted to know why they were there. My aunt took him to a psychologist and everything. She eventually did some research on the house and discovered that a man in his early 30s had committed suicide in that house in the early 80s, a few years before they bought it. Also, when my cousin's younger brother was old enough to talk, he also began reporting that he too saw the man, and was absolutely terrified of him, because he said he would come into their room. He was so terrified he didn't want to sleep by himself. He refused to sleep in his bedroom. Another ghost sighting happened a few years later when I was about 8 or 9. My brother and I used to play near a creek in the backyard. Across the creek was an old house. This kind-looking old man would come outside the house and watch us play, but never say a word to us. He seemed to really enjoy watching us play, and didn't seem weird at all. He seemed to be a genuinely nice guy. He had white hair, was very fair-skinned, skinny, and always wore the same dress clothes, a button-up beige dress shirt, and dark brown dress pants and dress shoes. The thing that made me begin to feel uneasy was the fact that my outgoing brother never acknowledged the old neighbor man. He never looked in his direction, nor said a word. See, I didn't notice this the first few times we played back there, and never thought anything weird because the man seemed harmless. One day I finally got the courage to ask my brother if he saw the man sitting there on the porch. We were very close to the house, so he could clearly see anything that was there. My brother looked up and around and asked me if I was messing with him and trying to scare him. I couldn't believe it. There the man was as clear as day, and yet I was the only one who saw him. I told my brother I was going back to the house and he should come with me. He didn't, so I went to the house and asked my mom who lived in that house. She said that no one had lived in that house for years. I told her about the old man, and she said to get my brother and not go back there until her and my dad checked it out. I never saw him again. The story doesn't end there, though. It gets even more creepy. A few years later, a family moved into that house. We made friends with the 2 girls who lived there. One day the oldest girl told us that their house was haunted. They said they heard their cabinet doors in the kitchen open and close at night sometimes, and no one would be there, and the light switches would turn on and off. She said that her younger sister said she saw the ghost, and described him as an older gentleman, and said his name was Frank, and that he lived in that house. The family eventually moved away not too long after that. Years later, I was walking with my grandma at the cemetery above our house, and she commented that this grave we went by was that of the neighbor who used to live behind our house. He died in the 1960s, when my dad was a baby. According to his tombstone, he was 62 when he died. His first name? Frank. I asked my grandma if he was a fair-skinned, white-haired, slim-looking man, and she said yes, and asked if I'd seen a picture of him. I told her the story. It creeped her out, too. I had a strange experience when I was at my first job. I was 19, and working night shift at a house taking care of severely disabled people who couldn't talk, walk, or do anything on their own. I was washing dishes when I looked up and saw what I thought was my coworker walking into one of the clients' rooms to check on them. I wanted to speak with her, so I followed her into the room, and there was no one there but the client who was sleeping in bed. I looked out the window of the room and saw my coworker outside fixing another coworker's car. They were both outside. I honestly wasn't paying close attention to the woman I saw who walked into that bedroom. I just noticed she had short hair and was about the same height as my coworker. When my coworker came back inside, I told her that I could have sworn I saw her walk into the bedroom, and so I followed her, and no one was in there. I thought I was losing my mind. My coworkers looked at me and said that what I saw wasn't unusual, or the first person who claimed to see a woman in that house. Apparently that place had been the scene of a double homicide many years ago. A man and a woman were shot to death while they slept in their bed. Many people apparently have reported seeing what they believe to be the woman's ghost.